How much of it is instinctive, do you think? How much of it is instinctive? So when you are being invited by our friends in the media, myself included, potentially, of course, when you're being invited to feel sorry for parents who may struggle to find the money needed to pay VAT on school fees, where do your instincts take you? And then when you're being invited 24 hours later to feel sorry for people in receipt of disability benefits who are facing a reduction in their support, a reduction in their income, do you have a completely different response? Where do your instincts lie? Genuine question. I don't think we could get a phoning out of why our instincts lean in those directions. I suspect that the story about private education has been horrifically skewed in the British media precisely. Well, actually, do you know what? I bet not many people working for newspapers can afford to send their children to private school anymore. But the absolute head honchos will be able to. The absolute sort of editors and above. And there's this perception, because most of us, of course, with senior positions in the media went to private schools. So there's a perception that protection is necessary. But I bet it doesn't land with the British public. I can't remember the last polling that I saw, but there's no earthly way that people who are struggling to pay their food bills every month are going to be sparing much of a thought for people who, it turned out yesterday, are not taking their children out of private school. Should we start a clock? Should we start a little countdown to keep an eye on all the columnists and commentators who couldn't shut up about VAT on private schools for much of last year and indeed this year, and whether or not they're going to return to the story? Now it's emerged that next to no children have actually left the private sector to move into the state sector. That's not an opinion, that's counting. Should we start a little clock on that, see if there's going to be any sort of form of apology or reverse? Still waiting for the same people to apologise for Brexit and Donald Trump. So whether or not they're going to do a reverse ferret on the private education story is, I think you'll allow me to suggest, unlikely. So my instincts, you won't be surprised to learn, go in the direction of protecting people that aren't me. I don't think people like me, who can afford to send our children to private schools, need help from the government. We certainly don't need charitable status to be applied to the schools that our children go to in order to somehow benefit us even further in a desperately unequal society. And again, my instincts lean towards the most vulnerable in society. And perhaps naively, my presumption has always been that people in receipt of disability payments in particular will be are most vulnerable. Addressing a private meeting of Labour MPs last night, Keir Starmer said he would take tough decisions to cut the bill for working age health and disability benefits. Now that is a phrase that will strike a chill into hearts up and down the country, isn't it? People who, and again, perhaps naively, but I truly don't think so, people who are already struggling are being told that the struggle is not only real, but it's about to get measurably worse. A £3 billion cut over the next 3 years. Billions more expected to be announced later in the week. Quite probably a freeze on the personal independence payment till 2026, which would cost... You see, and then I say it'll cost some claimants more than £350 a year. And here is the heart of the problem. Here is the heart of the problem. For many people, particularly the kind of people persuaded that farmers need protecting from inheritance tax or that private school parents need protecting from VAT, they're not going to be able to conceive of a world in which £350 a year is a meaningful sum of money. They're genuinely not. What do you mean £350? That's why they say really stupid things like, why don't you just cancel your Netflix? Or why don't you eat fewer avocados? They have absolutely no concept of running out of money before you've run out of month. I mean, I barely do. I rely on you to tell me what it's like, and I hope a degree of empathy. But when you hear people denying that poverty exists, I mean, actively claiming that poverty doesn't exist, that if people are truly running out of money, then they must be spending it all on fags and beer. They are displaying an ignorance coupled with a callousness that is both deliberate and deceitful. And then you come back to the numbers, and then you come back to the inflation in recent years of these numbers, which is stunning. £13 billion increase between 2020 and 2024. That is. It was at 25. No, I beg your pardon. It was at 35 billion, the overall bill, and it is now at 48 billion. So that's an increase of 13 billion in the space of 3 to 4 years. And if things carry on like that, the bill will be 70 billion. Now, as a top-rate taxpayer, I'm happy to pay tax to help people who need help. Keir Starmer is suggesting this morning that some of these people need a different kind of help or don't need help at all. Or rather, if not this morning, then the suggestion is coming. And who do we turn to know? How do we know whether or not there is any room for saving, any room for cuts? They've pledged not to put taxes up. And, a lot of the stuff that they promised to do, they've subsequently retreated from on the grounds that the facts have changed. The world has changed. But promising to put taxes up is still in this country, whether we like it or not, a form of electoral suicide. It doesn't matter how many people we are in need of support. Telling the average Joe, and this isn't an insult or it's not judgmental, telling the average Joe that he or she is going to have to pay for people who are vulnerable is a really, really tricky ticket to sell. I think, didn't Nick have some calls this morning from people who are furious about the idea of folk who are living near electricity pylons getting 50 quid or something? Why should I be paying for that? It is a wonderful appetite to feed if you're so minded. Selfishness coupled with self-interest, actually, is probably a kinder word to say. Self-interest is an incredibly powerful drug. Some people will never be weaned off it, but you can't have a fully functioning society unless you are capable, or enough people are capable, of pausing self-interest. So I know that poverty exists. I know that it is most likely to be in place in homes where work is impossible or very, very hard. But I also think that there is a sense of gravity to some of these numbers, particularly this massive increase in the amount of money being spent. And the belief that benefits are too easily claimed by young people with mild mental illness. So I think those are the 2 or 3 avenues into this that we will take this morning. The first is, in the context of invisible health conditions, okay, so obviously if you are severely disabled, then the idea that you could just pull your socks up and go out and do a few shifts is absurd. So I'm not talking about you today, although I am conscious that you will be very worried by the rhetoric of reduction in the support that you receive, and we will return to your cases and your interests at a later date. But the idea that everybody, or the idea that there are billions and billions of pounds being unfairly claimed, well, that's why I opened the programme this morning with a question about instincts. It's an instinct question, isn't it? Do you believe that there are billions and billions of pounds being illegally or dishonestly claimed? None of the statistics support it. The figures for fraud are close to negligible, and it may be that there's loads and loads of undetected fraud out there, but it seems unlikely. So my instincts tell me that these are not paths you go down because you think life is going to be a bed of roses. But my instincts could be wrong. And the only thing that gives me pause is this huge increase in disability benefits, the ones that are not means tested and not linked to employment status. They're meant to help the recipient with the extra daily costs of disability. You can get between £1,500 and just shy of £10,000 a year, depending on the assessed level of disability. So I would cautiously suggest that nobody with very, very visible disabilities is going to be or rather nobody with invisible disabilities is going to be at the upper end of that market. Again, £1,500 a year to the kind of people whining about inheritance tax for farmers and VAT on school fees. They're not going to even notice £1,500 a year being added to or taken away from their annual spending power. They're genuinely not going to notice. And this is where I worry that commentary is dictated in this country by people who are as financially comfortable as I am. that these conversations are had by politicians and pundits, commentators and columnists who will truly not notice 1,500 quid less or 1,500 quid more in their incomings and outgoings at the end of the year. It's Mr. McCorber territory again, isn't it? It's the idea that if you're one penny over your income, result misery, and if you're one penny under your income, result happiness. And it doesn't matter what your income is, that's true. But if the figures being bandied around are somehow fueling your conviction that people claiming to be in trouble, people claiming to be vulnerable, are all swinging the lead, are all taking the mickey. You know someone who knows someone whose window cleaner went out with someone who used to be married to someone who claims this, that and the other. I just don't know quite what we're supposed to make of it when it's the Labour Party leading us into this territory. The government is concerned that the recent growth in the bill for these benefits, which rose by nearly £13 billion to £48 billion between 2019-20 and 2023-24, is unsustainable. I don't think it's easy to claim if you're a young person with mild mental illness. So that's my first question. Because when things get written up as a culture war row with right-wing politicians and media claiming the benefits are too easily claimed by young people with mild mental illness, right? That absolutely chills me to the core, that kind of journalism. And this is in The Guardian. Because that looks to me like the kind of false equivalence that has paved the path of Donald Trump into the White House. As if the story, or as if the job of a journalist is not to report the facts. The Guardian has written up this story on its front page without actually analysing whether or not it is easy for young people to claim benefits for mild mental illness. They haven't actually looked into it. They've just said there are some people on the right. And remember, these are the same people who told you austerity was both good and necessary, that Liz Truss would be a brilliant economic guru, that Boris Johnson was a stand-up guy who could be trusted with the safety of the country at a time of immeasurable peril, that Brexit would be a brilliant idea, that Donald Trump would be a genius and the best thing since sliced bread for British interest. These are the same people who are claiming that benefits are too easily claimed by young people with mild mental illness. But we're so bent now that it gets reported as a bit like we used to do climate change. Here's 99% of the world's scientists all claiming or all proving one thing. Here's some idiot with a column in the Daily Telegraph claiming the opposite, and we're going to treat them like equal and opposite forces. We're going to give them 50-50. So I don't know, but you do. How hard or easy is it for a young person with mild mental illness to claim benefits? That's question number one. How hard or easy is it? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. I don't think we can answer the question of why this has risen by £13 billion in such a short period of time. But I think we can answer the question of, or we can define the difference between can't and won't. So in the context of invisible disability, what is the difference between can't work and won't work? We've done this question recently with schools, with the huge number of children who aren't going to school. I think it's the same question. Do you? I think it's the same subject. I think there's this cohort of fellow humans who are going through stuff that the rest of us don't recognise and either choose not to believe or choose to believe. And it hinges on the distinction between can't and won't. You've got a child in bed telling you that they can't go to school. As a parent, you think it's won't. You think there's nothing physically wrong with you. All right, you're feeling a bit blue. You're feeling a bit under the weather. You can go, and I know if you do go, if I push you out the door, I know you'll be all right in half an hour. I'll get a message from you on the bus saying, oh, I'm all right now. But pushing you out the door is hard because I also love you. And now imagine it's an adult. So I can't leave the house. I can't hold down a job. I can't commit to these hours. I can't commit to these shifts. And because I love you, I think my job is to persuade you that you can. My job is to talk you into doing it. My job is to say, of course you can. Just give it one last push. Come on. You can do this. Little bit of stick, little bit of carrot. And I don't know what the difference is between can't and won't. And I don't want you to hate me, but when I look at these numbers, I can't help thinking there is probably some can't in there and some won't. There is probably some won't in there? Because if there isn't, then this is horrific. Absolutely horrific. To take people who are already in agony, mental agony, and add to their burdens. So what's the difference between can't and won't? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Okay? And there will be, we'll all know someone who knows someone. I'm not suggesting these stories don't exist, who seem to be swinging the lead. But that's what worries me most about the way The Guardian have reported this story. I watched a play last night called Punch. It's absolutely brilliant. It's by James Graham, who you've met on this programme and on the Full Disclosure podcast. And speaking of Full Disclosure, Julie Hesmanhouch is in it. It's about that lad Jacob, who you met last week on Wednesday, I think, who killed someone. He killed a man called James, whose mum's called Joan, actually, which resonated a bit with me for obvious reasons, with one punch. A single punch. It was the impact of the head on the pavement that actually killed him, but it was the punch that set that chain of medical events in motion. And it is a piece of extraordinary theatre. But what James Graham does throughout is draw these problems back to society, back to cuts and back to austerity. Makes cases that if there hadn't been so many cuts, there wouldn't be so much crime. If there hadn't been so many cuts, there wouldn't be so much poverty. If there hadn't been so many cuts, there wouldn't be so many untreated mental health problems running around our society. And I'm thinking of that this morning. It's on at the New Vic. No, the Young Vic. It's on at the Young Vic, by the way, near Waterloo in London. And I don't imagine it's easy to get a ticket because it's so flipping good. But if you can get one, then grab it now. So, 20 minutes after 10. What's going on? What's the difference between can't and won't? And how easy is it for a young person with, quote, mild mental illness to claim benefits? Because even The Guardian tells me that right-wing politicians and media are claiming that it's too easy, without mentioning that they're exactly the same people who also claimed, well, you know the litany now of things that they have been horrifically and horribly wrong about, to the detriment of everybody except them.